I'm your host, Cloaked Testament, and this is the Timeworn Record, where we deep dive into history's most intriguing stories, unveiling the mysteries and truths that lie beneath, possibly forgotten. What does it mean when a dying child holds the fate of a kingdom in his hands? What becomes of a nation when its future is shaped not by warriors or statesmen, but by a frail, determined boy cloaked in velvet and trembling with fever? This is not a tale of royal majesty or childhood innocence. This is the eerie, unsettling story of Edward VI, the Boy King, who rewrote the laws of succession, waged war on centuries of belief, and ruled with a quiet cruelty that belied his age. A king not remembered for victory, but for the questions he left behind. Edward VI was born on October 12, 1537, the long-awaited son of King Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. His arrival was greeted as salvation. Church bells rang across England, bonfires blazed, and prayers of thanksgiving filled the air. But beneath the rejoicing was death. Queen Jane died just 12 days later from complications of childbirth. England had gained a prince but lost a queen. The price of Edward's life was blood, and it would not be the last time. From his first breath, Edward was more than a child. He was a symbol, a fragile answer to the dynastic chaos that had haunted the Tudors. Henry VIII had torn through wives in pursuit of a male heir, dismantled the Catholic Church's authority, and placed a heavy burden on this newborn boy, the burden of survival. But Edward was no warrior prince. He was pale, thin, and constantly ill. He suffered from fevers, lung infections, and a delicate constitution that kept him from the robust life of most noble boys. And yet, he was brilliant. His tutors marveled at his intellect. He mastered Latin, debated theology, and showed an early obsession with religious reform. In that pale shell was a fierce mind, one determined to reshape the soul of England. When Henry VIII died in 1547, Edward was just 9 years old. A golden crown was placed upon his head, but the real power remained in the hands of others. A regency council was formed, and Edward Seymour, the king's uncle, stepped forward as Lord Protector. Seymour was a man of vision and fire, determined to turn Edward's reign into a triumph of Protestant reform. Churches were stripped bare, statues destroyed, Latin was replaced with English. In 1549, the Book of Common Prayer was introduced, a new religious backbone for a new England. But not everyone bowed willingly. In the West Country, the prayer book rebellion broke out. Catholic peasants rose up in defiance, and Seymour crushed them with merciless force. Thousands died. Edward, though just a child, endorsed it all. In his journal, he noted the execution of rebels without a flicker of emotion. Was it ignorance or conviction? As Edward grew, his influence deepened. Behind his boyish appearance was a cold certainty. He believed utterly in his mission, to purge England of what he saw as idolatry and corruption. Heresy laws were tightened. More Catholics were burned or hanged. Edward did not lift the sword himself, but his signature sent many to their deaths. He read scripture while others screamed on the pyres. Seymour's rule faltered. Ambitious, autocratic, and increasingly isolated, he alienated the nobility and lost control of the court. In 1549, he was arrested. His dream of guiding England through reform was shattered. And into that vacuum stepped John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, colder, cleverer, and far more dangerous. Dudley was no idealist. He was a tactician. Where Seymour saw glory, Dudley saw opportunity. He married his son to Edward's Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, and made himself indispensable to the weakening king. Under Dudley's influence, the court grew sharper, its politics more ruthless. And Edward, now in his early teens, grew sicker. He likely suffered from tuberculosis. He coughed blood, lost weight, and could hardly stand. His skin turned waxen, and his voice was often a whisper. But his mind remained alert. In those final months, Edward worked harder than ever. He scrawled policy notes, read treatises on divine right, and most ominously, turned his gaze to the question of succession. Edward knew he was dying, and he knew that if Mary, his Catholic half-sister, inherited the throne, all his reforms would burn. The Mass would return. Rome would reclaim England, and the men who had guided him, Dudley, Cranmer, and others would likely hang. So Edward did something extraordinary. He rewrote the future. In his own trembling hand, he penned the devise for the succession, bypassing both Mary and Elizabeth. He named Lady Jane Grey as his heir a girl, just 16, devoutly Protestant, and entirely unprepared. But it wasn't about Jane. It was about preserving the Reformation, even if it meant breaking the law, tradition, and God's own commandment of family. Edward died on July 6, 1553. He was 15. The boy king was buried with solemn ceremony, but no great mourning. Already, England was bracing for what came next. Jane was proclaimed queen, but her reign lasted only 9 days. Mary, with unexpected speed and support, marched on London. The people rallied behind her, not out of Catholic zeal, but fatigue. Fatigue from change, from chaos, from men playing God through children. Jane was imprisoned. Dudley was executed, and Mary Tudor, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, was crowned queen. The wheel had turned again. Mary's reign was swift and bloody. Protestant bishops were burned. The Book of Common Prayer was outlawed. Churches were redraped in gold. England groaned under the Marian persecutions, a wave of religious terror that sought to undo Edward's every move. But Edward's legacy refused to die. His reforms, especially the Book of Common Prayer, resurfaced under Elizabeth I. His Protestant foundation, though bloodied, endured. He had laid stones too deep to be dislodged. Was Edward merely a pawn of Dudley and Seymour? Perhaps. But pawns don't write succession laws. They don't approve executions. They don't draft new liturgies in their final hours. He was a boy, yes, but a boy who believed he had been chosen. Historians debate how much control he truly wielded. But one thing is clear, he had conviction. He saw himself as a servant of God, a shepherd of souls, even as his own body failed him. And that image of a trembling child, dictating theology between coughs of blood lingers. His death was not peaceful. Witnesses said he gasped for breath in his final days, calling out for salvation. Some whispered that he believed himself damned, having altered the sacred line of inheritance. Others said he clutched his prayer book until the end, reciting psalms through cracked lips. He died thinking he had failed. But history tells a more complex tale. The Church of England, as we know it today, owes more to Edward VI than many realize. His brief reign shaped its form, its prayer, its independence. The Elizabethan Golden Age stood on a foundation he carved with trembling hands. But Edward paid dearly. His reign is a study in contradiction, strength in weakness, clarity in confusion, purpose in decline. He was too young to rule, yet too bold to ignore. The succession crisis he created led to executions, to war, to terror. Jane Grey died because of him. Mary's vengeance burned because of him. The blood of England soaked the ground in the wake of his decisions. But his dream, a reformed Protestant nation, survived. He never held a sword, but he changed the face of a kingdom. He never led an army, but he provoked wars of faith. He died a child, but his ghost lingered through generations. Edward VI, the boy who wore a crown of thorns instead of gold. The king who ruled from a sickbed, who signed death into law with a shaking hand. The monarch who tried to outrun death with faith and ink. He was not a puppet, not entirely. Somewhere beneath the weakness was steel. A soft-spoken king who left behind a nation forever changed by his actions, his writings, and the haunting silence of a life cut short. This was Edward VI, the child who rewrote the rules, the boy who dared to define a kingdom's soul before his own slipped away.